Welcome back to Resolutionary Leaders. Today I have the Resolutionary Leader, JL, calling in from Kansas City. Welcome, JL.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It's really exciting to be here. Yeah, representing the Midwest.
We are going to speak today about innovation and how to do something that is really a focus of how I like to approach conflict. And that is, how do we get to a better place after the conflict, using the conflict to actually make the team better and the relationships better? Because if you deal with conflict constructively, that is the outcome. You come closer together, you become stronger, communication becomes more robust, and trust increases. JL, take it away. Tell us how you and your company at Centered do this.
So I think one of the things we do a lot is a thing called a design sprint, where we bring a cross-functional group of people together to solve a very specific problem. It takes 2 to 5 days roughly. But the reason I bring it up in this context is, in a lot of organizations that we go and work with, building that cross-functional team is something they've never really done before. So you're bringing people from sales, from customer service, from R&D, you name it, and putting them in the same room and empowering them to solve a problem. And conflict is natural, right? These are people who have very different jobs with very different expectations and a lot of times very different outlooks on life. So they come to the table with whatever problem the company is looking to solve and bring all that with them. So it's natural for when that happens that these conflicts arise. And what we find is more often than not, what's really happening is a different perspective that's equally valid and extremely valuable is being expressed. And when we can get people to recognize that perspective, value that perspective, and then use it to create a new group perspective that represents everything, that perspective is what drives innovation. Because now it's not just one dimensional.
100%. So that's the billion-dollar question, though. What do you do to do that?
I think a lot of what we focus on is vulnerability, authenticity, trust, and fun.
Okay.
I think a lot of people...
You have an acronym for that? Because I feel like people have acronyms for everything now. Well, we could make one up right here.
Yeah, I was just saying, I don't know what that would be yet, but that's a good question.
No need for it. Vulnerability, go again.
Authenticity.
Trust.
And fun.
All right, love it.
And I listed in that order because that's the order we try and build it up in. For people, and I'll work backwards, for people to feel like they can loosen up and have fun together, they have to trust each other. If they don't trust each other, or to trust each other, to feel like you can be part of that trusting relationship, you have to feel like you can be yourself, so authentic. And for you to feel like you can be authentic, you have to be a little bit vulnerable. Mm-hmm. So they build, and Brene Brown, I think, is who says it, talks about it best. The vulnerability comes before trust, but it's said in a lot of different places. What we really start doing in the very beginning with icebreakers is we try and get people to open up about small things that I won't say are inconsequential, but which don't feel super threatening, but are at least a little bit vulnerable. And that just allows them to have that one positive interaction and vulnerability that kind of starts what I like to call the flywheel of vulnerability and trust spinning. And I'll say within an hour or two, you can usually get people to at least feel fairly comfortable talking. Mm. If we do go in with a really contentious group, sometimes we'll do pre-work before the workshop just to try and make connection and help people come in with a better understanding of each other beforehand, but that's pretty rare. I think most people come into work in events like this wanting to do a good job, wanting to show up well, wanting to make connections and seize an opportunity. So most people don't require a lot of encouragement to participate, as long as you set the expectation that we're all going to assume good intentions first. Because I think that's where so much of this breaks down, is people come in assuming some sort of nefarious intent on the other side.
Two things. One, the work that I do, yes, everybody's coming in with that attitude. So the pre-work in those situations is vital. And I just did one of these group trainings, and there was a new person on the team, And when asked to like share something interesting that people wouldn't know about them, like just would be surprised. And
Yeah.
his response was, I got nothing. I'm a closed book. And
That
anyway,
kind of shuts things down.
needless to say, that guy just quit after 6 weeks on the job. He was like, no, I can't do team. I thought that was a very amusing, a closed book. So there's going to be zero vulnerability from here.
Yeah. I know one that we love is Two Truths and a Lie.
Yes, I love
You
that.
know,
Yeah.
and it just gets great conversation going. It's fun. It's just good. But I know one of the other things we focus on a lot is the language we use. So for right in the beginning, when we start talking about the problem statement, we don't frame it as the problem is, right? We frame it as what we call a how might we statement. So how might we accomplish this goal? So right in the beginning, it's inclusive. How might we? Not that there's this problem. And then we start talking about who it's for. So how might we solve this thing for these people? So now it becomes personal. And we can start tapping into people's empathy. And as soon as you start tapping into empathy in one area, it starts spilling over into all the other areas, which helps us with trust and authenticity and fun, if I'm being honest. And then we start going from there. Some other ways we frame language is in feedback. We encourage everyone to use the terms I like, I wish, I wonder. So this is what I like about it. I wish there was something that addressed this. I wonder how we might do that. And that makes it far less of a personal, hey, you didn't think about this. It's, I wonder how we could do this, right? All these little tweaks to the language help shape the environment. And I think it's one of those things where people don't realize how much it's actually affecting their behavior. But when you look back on it, our language affects how we view the world. So it only makes sense that that type of language in an environment like that is going to affect your perspective and your behavior.
I think a big part is about creating that defensiveness where you say, why would you do that? Why did we do, why you? When you make it, the person immediately wants to defend their choices or,
right.
And so when it's how or focusing on the situation and seeing it as a joint, how can we solve this? As opposed to, why did you do that? And how are you going to fix it? I feel like,
right. And it's natural for us to talk about me and you or I and avoid the us and the we. Mm-hmm. But if you start very early in a situation, in a team environment like that with the we, the us, and you just carry it all the way through, it builds up its own momentum. I don't know that I've ever had a group that we've taken through this where we've really had a problem as long as we start it and we're consistent all the way through. And we'll do some other things like when we try to make decisions, a lot of times we'll use things like dot voting. So it allows people to express an opinion, not completely anonymously, but without a lot of direct, like, why are you voting here? And then we also try and make it very clear who is the decision maker in the room. So it makes it very clear that I'm just expressing an opinion, but this person is making the decision. And it helps people understand the power dynamics so they can be a little bit more comfortable. Because I think that's another thing, people, when they get into a room and they don't quite understand how a decision is being made or how progress is being made, that uncertainty creates a lack of safety as well.
And can you just explain dot voting?
Oh, sorry. Yeah. A lot of times, so in a design sprint, if you look at the walls in the room, they're like plastered with Post-it notes, paper with drawing on them, all this sort of stuff. Basically, the idea is we want to get everything out of our brains and up on the wall. So like the wall is a representation of the thought process. And if we have options, so let's say we've done some sketching on solutions that we want to design and build prototypes for, and we have 10 of them, and we're trying to prioritize them and features of them. Rather than have everyone raise their hand and vote and things like that, we give them little stickers, little dots, and we say you have 3 dots. You can vote however you want. You can put all 3 on one idea, or you can put 1 dot on 3 different ideas. And then we tally them up and we say, this is the one with the most dots. And that is input into the decision. This is what the team thinks is most valuable.
Interesting. That's great.
It's something that comes out of kind of the design thinking school of thought, which if you've never looked at it, it's great.
I like the 3 dots. I like the fact that you've got 3 dots and you can put them all on one.
Yeah. And it'll vary. Sometimes we give 5, sometimes we give 10, depending on what the situation is. But it is a way for you to not only stress where you think the attention should be, but the volume of your opinion, the impact you want your vote to have as well.
So just to dive back, tell us a little bit about how you got into the role that you're in now. How did you get here?
It's a little bit of a long and twisty road. I actually started out as a software engineer after I graduated college with my computer science degree. And I did that because at the time I had told myself the story that I just didn't understand people very well and I understood computers. If I had to go back and do it over again, I think I would have gone into psychology because I find that people fascinate me. And it took 10 years or so of getting there. And I just slowly, I don't know, let's see. A few years after I graduated, I went back for my MBA, met some really interesting people. I started getting into leadership in the software company I was in at the time. So I had to manage people. I went into the agency world about 15 years ago and started working in companies like Ford, Wendy's, Pfizer, and seeing all these different environments. And I realized really quick that the challenge was not the software. The challenge wasn't even the organization. The challenge was the people and the leadership. And I just started slowly making the change over to executive coaching, workshop facilitation, design thinking, all that area. And I've been doing that for the coaching for about 5 years, the facilitation and workshop stuff for about 13, 14 years. And then lean and agile space, I've been there for about 20 years, that's part of what also got me into this.
Amazing. So, what are the challenges that you're seeing now, post pandemic? Have you seen a change in the workforce, or
Yeah, I think
what are those changes?
I'm sure everyone's heard more of this than they want to about the whole remote versus in-person office. I was very much a wow, remote's here to stay, and it's been really disappointing to see some companies push back so hard on it recently. But I do think in-person stuff should be purposeful, not mandatory.
I agree.
And I think when you approach it that way, you make those in-person moments really powerful. I think when you're in office all the time, to some extent, those in-person moments feel a little watered down in retrospect. But now you have an option, you have an opportunity to be very focused in how you bring people together and supply a really powerful meaning and purpose for it that is motivational. I'm a big fan of Daniel Pink's framework of purpose, autonomy, and mastery are the kind of the pillars of motivation. And when you can really create a powerful purpose, that people show up so much better. They know what they're doing and why they're there matters. So they're coming ready to get it done. And if it's a shared purpose, it's even better. That's one of the magic pieces of the design sprints is that shared purpose. We know this is an important problem. You all are empowered to solve it. Let's do it. It really makes a difference in the way people show up. Outside of that, I think people are far less tolerant of toxic situations now than they were, which I love. It really creates some accountability and leadership that maybe wasn't there pre-pandemic.
Why do you think that is?
I think people, what's that?
I said I have my theory, but I want to hear yours.
And now I'm curious about yours too, but I think during the pandemic, people realized they had more choices than they thought. It started somewhat with the remote work. So many people, I think, were of the opinion remote work doesn't work. You have to be in the office in person. They realized that wasn't true. And I think people started to question, if that's not true, what else isn't true? Maybe I don't have to put up with this. Maybe I can get my work done if I don't work normal work hours and it's still okay. Maybe I can have some of the flexibility I need and still deliver the value that I was hired to deliver. So knowing that and knowing that those options exist and that companies exist that supply that opportunity, I think people are willing to jump a little bit more. I'm curious though, what are your thoughts?
That and that the value there's an increase in choice. However, there's also a greater understanding of what people have been giving up, the
Mm,
value of family connections, the cost of the commute, the cost of being in a toxic work environment. I also think that it increased being out of touch, like physically in your space and not being bumped up against constantly as
yeah.
we're out in the world, increased the sensitivity of being bumped up against. So it was more jarring going back at, things that we were desensitized to, we're now sensitized to.
Right.
Uh, and I also think that people went through a lot. So
Yeah.
increased sensitivity and then also a decrease in resilience because it's just for a lot of people, and I think we're getting back, but for a lot of people, there's been so much that's happened. And so the fuse, like the tolerance to it is just lower. I'm not doing this. So those, and I think the change in the workforce as well. I think the people coming back into the workforce, we've got a generation who started from home, and it's a shock. It's a different shock than people that were in the office 5 days a week, their whole career. For them to go back to the workplace and be there 3 days a week is, oh, this is amazing. It's the opposite for people that are like, my God, I got to go to the office 3 days a week. So, yeah, I think it's a lot of just a change in temperament, but also an increase in valuing other things.
And I think I love what you say about values because I think there's probably a healthy dose of valuing other things, but I think there's probably also a healthy dose of realizing what you actually valued before but hadn't been paying attention to.
Right. You were forced into changing your life and what you did and what you were comfortable with. And suddenly you're comfortable with spending all day with your family. Yeah. And then, yeah, it's something that you miss. I couldn't believe how what I got from being around my children, from them being, I feel guilty saying it was a priceless experience for me with the ages my children were to really understand who they are and what they were experiencing at school. So, yeah, it definitely changed. It really changed my trajectory as a business person. Right now, all my decisions are based in the foundation of it's my family first. When they leave home, I'll can shift my focus, but this is a moment and I don't want to miss it.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. And I think everyone found those types of moments, whether you have kids or not. You realize there are things in your life, relationships in your life that you were ignoring. I think maybe one of the things people are missing and organizations are missing is if you want people to come back, give them the relationships that are going to bring them back.
Mm.
Don't just make it about the work, make it about the connection. That's one of the reasons I love innovation, design sprints, things like that. It is very few things bring people together like solving a common problem.
Mm-hmm.
When you think about some of the closest relationships you have, a lot of times they're with the people you went through the hardest times with. And I think there's power in that. And I think if organizations can figure out how to leverage that side of the human spirit, they can get a lot more innovation, a lot more impact from people, and not in the normal, typical micromanagement kind of way. I always feel a little bit dirty when I say we can get more out of people because that feels like wringing sweat out of a rag kind of thing. But I think this is actually one of the healthy ways where we can get more out of people if we get very intentional about the relationships and how we form them and how we maintain them in organizations. That could be a healthy way to bring people back. Not full time, not 5 days a week. I don't think anyone should do that. But I do think 3 days a week, 2 days a week, hell, even twice a month. I don't know, whatever works right for the team and the people involved. But focusing on the relationships, I think, would be a really good step.
Yeah. And I think when you're saying squeezing the bit more out of them, I see it as accessing their potential,
Right.
really accessing what is already there and getting the other stuff out of the way so that person can show up.
Right.
And that feels good. Like I want to be squeezed like that.
Yeah. Liz Wiseman, have you read the book Multipliers?
No.
If not, it's really good because, and what you said made me think of her because she did a study, her team did a study where they looked, and I hope I get this right because it's been a while since I've read it, but they had a kind of, what is it, diminishers and multipliers, I think were the ends of the spectrum for leadership. And the multipliers got like 2.1 times the effort or productivity or results. I think it was productivity over the diminishers out of their people.
Mm.
And the way she phrased it in her book was when they first saw the numbers, they thought there was a problem because you can't get more than 100% of someone's effort. So if the diminishers got 0, the most the multipliers could get was 100, so 2 times. And they went back and talked to people and they said, no, working for this leader, I did things I didn't think I could do. I went further than I thought I could because they helped, they showed me the way, they gave me the motivation, they set the expectations, whatever it was. And I think that's the power that we're talking about here of that positive motivation. When you build the right relationships, when you establish the psychological safety, the trust, the authenticity, all those things, and you throw in a little bit of a dose of fun around a common problem, people do things they didn't think they were going to be able to do before. They come up with ideas that wouldn't have occurred to them otherwise because they would have spent too much energy being defensive or protecting themselves.
I have this business idea that just keeps popping up for me. And I've been speaking to a number of people that are military and how they train the military to operate in high stress environments. And they put them in a really high stress environment and they make them do it over and over again. So when they're in that place, they just function on automatic. And I feel like we need to create like this high conflict, just really toxic environment and put like a team in there. You have the actors who are playing like the horrible boss or the shitty coworker or whatever it is, but they like create this really intense that sets off everybody's fight or flight, and they have to operate somehow as a team to get through this and put this project together or do something that's not killing somebody, but actually is relates to what they do in their job. But they have to come together and solve this problem in this really intense environment. I think that'd be like every time you hire someone new on the team, throw the team back in to this environment. They will have to solve a problem together.
I think to some extent, that's a little bit of what the design sprint is. Throw the team together to solve a problem. I do think it's interesting. You talked about some of the toxicity and things like that. There was another study, I think they called it the Good Apple study or something along those lines. Oh, it's been so long since. It came out of a book called The Culture Code by Daniel Coyle. What they did is they formed small teams. I think it was 4 people. And one person on the team was always a plant for the psychology study, like this normal way these work. And the goal was for that plant to be the bad apple, right? To display some form of negative interaction. And I think they had 4 categories. I don't remember what they were. And they were trying to measure, like, how did that affect productivity of the team? And they got all the normal results you would think, except for occasionally they'd have teams that were performing fine, good. When they asked what was going on, the bad apples would say, there was this person, they stepped into the leadership role, and for whatever reason, they kept drawing me in. Like every time I tried to go down this way, they kept pulling me in, and they called them the good apple, right? Because that's what they did. They were like the anti-bad apple on the team. And I think if I could go into every organization and just find their good apples, because every organization has them, right? You can't not, like they're just everywhere. If I could find them and say, okay, here are your 4 good apples. Let's talk about how we elevate them a little bit, how we empower them, and it makes a difference.
But they're bad apples. They're the anti, like.
The good apples are the anti-bad apple. And I think every organization has both.
So you're saying there was someone that would always pull the bad apple and they called that the good apple.
Right.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the bad apple was trying to be a negative influence on the team. And the good apple, like not in a bad way, but like just made it really hard for that to even happen.
Wow.
And I think those are the leaders that like Liz Wiseman is talking about in her book, the multipliers. And she has a whole list of what their traits are, behaviors are, and everything. It's great. And we try and use a lot of her research in our approach to our workshops. But I think if you can find those people and identify them and really, you have to be careful. You can't just like magically elevate them, but if you can grow them, I think there's a lot of power there. And I think you even have leaders. I think you have a lot of people who focus on introverted leadership. That's been a topic that's come up a lot in the last 5 years. And I think a lot of times that's where your good apples are hiding. They're the introverted leaders. They're the leaders that don't want the recognition or don't need the recognition. They're just there for the people. I think those are the leaders you really want to focus on and find, because in that study, they just make it really hard for the toxicity to stick around.
Do you find that when you do your creative sprints, do you see, oh, there's a good apple? Is it obvious?
Oh yeah. You usually, maybe you can't tell on the first day, but by day 2, absolutely. And of course, go ahead.
What does that look like?
I think a lot of times you'll see they will adopt to like the inclusive language, hands down, no problem. The I like, I wish, I wonder, they may not use those terms because they're so used to using other phrases that do the same thing. We do I like, I wish, I wonder because it rolls off the tongue and we can remind people over and over, but they're doing that stuff just naturally. So I think a lot of the easiest way to find them is the language. But the other part of it is you can just watch the way people interact with them. They walk into a room and people just slowly turn their direction a little bit sometimes, or conversations are happening and you notice it's not like everyone just flocks around them, but everyone makes a pass to say something, to say hi or whatever. They're a super connector, like what Malcolm Gladwell talked about in one of his books that I'm forgetting now. But you'll see these patterns start to form. They're like the eye of the storm. Everything's kind of not quite rotating around them, but like in their vicinity. And I think there's maybe been 1 or 2 teams we've gotten together where maybe I didn't see one on a smaller team, but any team that gets up into the 10-person range, I think there's almost always one. And you'll also see, by the same token, see the bad apples. And maybe that's the easiest way to see the good apples is every time the bad apple and the good apple are in the same place, all of a sudden the behavior and the engagement from the bad apple improves. It elevates.
That's crazy.
It is. It's almost magic. I wish I don't. I've done my research on what it takes to be a good apple, and I don't know that I'm as good of an apple. I don't know that I'm as good of an apple as I could be. But there are these people out there that either through some sort of natural gift or just learning on their own have really found a way to tap into human potential.
I love it. We need to start. When you go on do these teams, you need to pull those good apples and put them through some rigorous like questions and find out, what is it? What are you doing?
I think some of it is just personality. Like you can't separate out just individual behaviors because it's just them as a person. Because I've seen it be like the really loud people. I've seen it also be the really quiet people and everything in between. But I will say one of the big benefits of doing stuff like this is we do tell leadership, that's a person to watch. So not only do you get a problem that's solved, but you also get a little insight into some of the people who are there. And I haven't seen an organization yet that was completely happy with their succession plan. So finding these people and understanding like this could be a person to grow and to elevate at some point, that's really valuable for the long-term benefit of an organization as well.
Where should we go from here?
I do think I'm really passionate about the topic of leadership. And I think when you talk about conflict resolution, especially in the form of innovation, it's always interesting to me to see how leadership approaches those critical conversations, those critical like tipping points where a decision that may not be popular has to be made or something along those lines. And I say that not knowing exactly where this conversation can go, but I wonder, when you think about those critical conversations, I wonder what are all the elements that go into creating a really powerful, successful, critical conversation, if that makes sense. Something where the stakes are high, people have skin in the game, and maybe not everyone feels completely safe with the outcome. If that makes sense.
I think what you said at the beginning about seeing the situation as not attached to a person, but as a problem to solve, and for us all to solve it together. We all
Mm.
want this is the common ground. We all have this problem, right?
Yeah.
It might be affecting us all differently, but it's our common ground. And so solving this problem, we're on the same team because we all want to solve it. So being able to come at it from, we want to all win. Nobody wants to lose. So how do we all not lose and all win as much as we can with what we've got? And I think coming at it like that makes it less personal and allows people to do what you were saying about putting their brain, everybody's different perspective and brain, and so it's communicating robustly around what it is that you need, what's important to you. And I think in situations like that, having a neutral third party is really important because they're able to hear what your honest need is, hear the other side, or really understand everybody's needs. And then they don't have to tell everybody, but they're able to work out, oh, that's important to that person and that's important to that person. So I'm able to go here and go there. And so that neutral little satellite moving around is, I think, fundamental to those critical conversations among a group of people.
And I love what you're saying, that there's two elements to it. The shared understanding, like why are we all here, which I think is really important. And maybe not even the why, but what is the context we're all dealing with, and setting that foundational, here's the situation we're all in, even before you start getting to the here's what we're trying to solve. So shared understanding followed by like the vision or the direction. Are you a Simon Sinek fan?
Yes, who isn't?
You may have heard have you heard the story he tells, or the little situation he describes with about the importance of direction and vision? So basically what he'll say is, imagine you're standing in a corner and I tell you to walk somewhere in the room. I don't care where, but I need you to walk in a straight line. And as you walk, he puts a chair in front of you. If you're like most people, you're going to stop because you were told walk in a straight line. Now reset, you put back in the corner, and you say, that corner over there, we have to get there. You have to be there. I'd love it if you walk in a straight line. That would be really great, and it's important, but that corner is absolutely critical. And as you walk and the chair's in front of you again, you just walk around it and keep going. And the thing that's really powerful in that is when you don't have that destination, that shared vision in mind, we become very process obsessed.
Yeah.
And we become very me obsessed as well. But when we have that vision, that problem to solve, that direction that we're all trying to get to, that destination we're all trying to get to, now we can become value obsessed. How do we solve the problem? And I think that, built on top of the shared understanding of the situation, the constraints, and all that sort of stuff, really allows the critical conversations, to your point, become, I don't want to say less personal, because I think almost everything we do in the business world is personal on some level, but I think it becomes more collective, might be the better term, more collaborative, far less about me or you and about us at that point. It's like those comics that say, show two people arguing about a problem and then two people together fighting the problem. It's that shift. It's no longer two people fighting over what the solution should be. It's two people against the problem. And I think that's I love the way you phrased that and the way you started there. It makes me wonder sometimes, maybe not too much, why people avoid the crucial conversations so much. And I think it's the fear, right?
We're designed to avoid things that feel unsafe. Disagreeing with somebody, particularly somebody in a place of power, does not feel safe at all.
Yeah.
So we are first of all, we interpret it as being unsafe, which creates a reaction in our body, which does not make us want to sit down and have a conversation. Makes us want to just run away, and also doesn't set our brain up to really have a quality conversation because we're not in a calm, open state to we're in that amygdala fear response.
Yeah.
So that's why I think we avoid those conversations. But yes, to be able to take some deep breaths and realize that, oh, I'm having a moment and I really want to understand this. And so I'm going to sit down and really try to understand what's happening here because there's a breakdown.
Yeah, that emotional intelligence to put some space between the emotion and the reaction is really important. I do think it's a good argument for the good apples, for one. When you talk about that whole idea of we want to avoid the unsafe moments, I wonder how much of that is tied to that positional authority. And if you find more leaders that are better influencers, I guess that term's more of a YouTube, like, social media thing, but more in tune with using their influence rather than their power
Mm-hmm.
to direct situations. I wonder if there's a good correlation between those types of people and a willingness to have the crucial conversations.
Yeah. I think when you're falling back on positional power, it's not an empowered place. When
It's
you
inherently unsafe.
yes, so you're going to react in a defensive way.
Right. So really, I think that's another argument for the collaboration, whether it's bringing people back into the office, whether it's a workshop or whatever. How do you get people to leave some of that authority at the door? And I think that's probably something that's really, actually, it's not probably, I guarantee it's something that's extremely uncomfortable for a lot of the leaders. And I think that's when we go back to the differences pre and post pandemic. That might be one of the things people notice the most, is the lack of some of that positional authority shadowing the work they do. And I'm thinking back to my experiences with it, and I think there's actually a big element of that.
Say a bit more about that.
When people started working from home, that positional authority was, if not absent, it was weaker, right? The managers, the leaders that would normally check in or potentially walk behind you or poke their head into a meeting, that wasn't there anymore.
Yeah.
And I think that maybe released some stress that people didn't really know they had. Because I think a lot of the ways we exercise positional authority are really subtle and a lot of times even unintentional. So to the point where we don't think about them. I'd be curious how many people would point to that as something that they noticed or not from when working from home.
That's a really interesting thought. And I think to also realizing how much stress that was having on you, right? So you're now at home and you've got that positional power that's not looking over your shoulder anymore, and it's a relief to just,
Yeah.
particularly if you're a self-motivated, going to get it done anyway kind of person, right. And then to go back into the office and start experiencing that again, it would feel jarring.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I think what we found with people working from home was most people are fairly self-motivated if they have reasonable expectations set. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where a lot of management and leadership struggled, is realizing they hadn't set the best expectations. And when they weren't there to keep pushing on things, that's where problems started to show up. But I would love to study that a little bit more, to look into that a little bit more. Because I do think positional authority, like I said, shows up in some really subtle ways. And I don't think most leaders with positional authority go into these situations with the intent to control, or we'll use the word control, to control the way they do. And I think I would be curious what it would take for people to see the difference and to start changing behavior in those contexts. Because that might be another thing that helps people feel more comfortable coming back into the office for whatever frequency their organization lands on, is if their leaders started showing up a little differently.
I think it's such a blind spot for leaders as well. I think they don't
Yeah.
realize the impact that their positional power has. Uh, I see it with HR. Like
Yeah.
HR typically think that they are people go into HR because they like people, they want to be helpful, they see themselves a certain way, but there is something innate to the role that makes HR unsafe for the
Right.
average employee. And the disconnect between how HR sees itself and then how the employees see it. I had this when I worked in a company and I was in the employee relations team and I'm a nice person. And the amount of people that would like we'd finish a call and I'd be like, it's been great, but I hope I don't talk to you again anytime soon. And I'd be like, what? But
Yeah.
it made me realize, even though they were still just by the role, a fear around having to interact with this team, with me.
It is interesting. I hear a lot of I do talk to a decent number of HR people in a coaching capacity, and I hear the concept of being the compliance cop
Yeah.
come up a lot. And I do think it's if there's a police officer sitting at the table in the restaurant two down, you might change your topic of conversation a little bit depending on what you were doing. Or if you see a cruiser, a police cruiser at the intersection, when you go through that light, you're going to go a little bit
Yeah.
slower, right? It's that.
And ended too and sitting up straight.
Yeah, exactly. I'm a perfectly respectable citizen. There's nothing wrong here at all. But it is, I think a lot of leaders have a gap between their intent and their effect, their impact, that they don't fully understand. And I bet a lot of it comes down to their blind spots. And it reminds me of the saying, the axe forgets, but the tree remembers.
But how do you change that? I'm never going to not feel a little bit guilty or naughty when I see a police cruiser. Like I immediately start going, okay, wait, like just checking everything. What's my speed?
Yeah.
And I've done nothing wrong. But I'm immediately feel that. How do you change that? It's a positional thing. That's their job is to police.
Absolutely. And I think so most people in that situation wouldn't have done anything wrong anyways, right? For the most part. But let's say you're in that situation, you look over, you see the police cruiser, you have that initial reaction, you look a little closer, and like, oh, it's John. I know John. I've met him
Oh,
before. We've talked. He's not bad,
right.
and some of that melts away. I think there's a relationship piece there, and I think leaders can lean into that. But then I think there's also an emotional intelligence bit there as well, where you still have that reaction of, ooh, it's a police cruiser, I better make sure. But where you can also be like, wait a minute, I'm a good driver already. I'm good. Like, again, creating that space from that initial emotional reaction or emotional experience and your actual behavioral reaction to where there's thought in between. I think that's something they've shown over and over again. Emotional intelligence is trainable.
I love it because I'm thinking about myself. Once I've done all my checks, I'm like, oh, I'm good. Hey!
Yeah. Yeah.
I've done nothing wrong. You can't get me.
But I do think, especially in HR, because everyone's had that reaction where, oh my God, HR is calling me. I have no idea what I did wrong. Am I getting laid off? What's happening? But that's because it happens once in a blue moon. And I'm sure HR, like everyone else, is super busy, but like finding ways to create those connections and have those interactions that allow people to not feel that so much, and then training people to understand how they work inside, like the how that emotion is not necessarily coming from a rational, thought out place.
Mm-hmm.
And creating some space is a good thing. So you can actually now pick up the phone when HR calls and not be immediately on the defensive is only going to do good things for you. I think you can really teach people how to control how they show up, if that makes sense. Like to adopt a perspective, I don't want to say persona, but a perspective or a way of being that is most effective for the situation. In our workshops, we help people do that in a very controlled way. But I do think that's something you can train people in general on. Hell, I wish they'd teach it in high school.
I wish there's a whole bunch of things I'd teach in high school.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh.
It is interesting, though. I think when you think about how we resolve conflict, I think it's one of those areas where so much of that happens outside of the conflict. Like by the time you get to the conflict, so much is already either gone right or wrong. That it really narrows the window of what you can do in that moment. So maybe that's one of the big takeaways for me here. It is, if you're a leader, a workshop facilitator, a team member, whatever, if you want to avoid the conflict, the tough conversations, or turn that conflict into something constructive, the work to do that starts way back here, not when the conflict happens.
And with that, I think we can wrap it up. I 100% agree. I think that if people have conversations, address these little icks along the way, humanize themselves, then it's very difficult for things to get to this escalated place where people are entrenched in, you're wrong, I'm right. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time today. I really, really enjoyed talking to you, JL.
Thank you as well. This has been a lot of fun.
We will talk some more another day.